How many times have you heard that, well, you don't have a background in education. What do you know about what you're doing? And in fact, I had a bit of a riff. I'm that guy in the school board member who says, what is a title this, or what is a, it's EduSpeak. It is a foreign language. And I can't tell you how many times I have stopped somebody dead in their tracks and looked at them and literally said, English, please. Because if you don't know what they're saying, it's not transparent. And they throw around these acronyms, and I do it all the time. I'm on the board now more than 3 years. English, please. When you speak in the acronym, you lose people. And I'll tell you what, part of it is they're just so steeped in what they're talking about, they don't realize people around them don't. But there are some of them who realize that most people on a school board will not do something like, English, please, because they don't want to make it look like they don't know what's happening. Okay, so here's my mindset on this, and I think it's a big point of transparency, and it's your responsibility, in my never to be humble opinion as your ever humble school board member, to bring this to light. And that is, if you don't know what they're talking about, most of the people watching on your community television stations don't either. Now, if the people before you are truly experts and you're truly professionals, you owe it to yourself and to them and to your public to say, English, please, and make them explain it in a language that everybody can understand. Because when you bring it down to that level that everybody can understand, naturally, if you're inquisitive at all, and even if you're not, there are going to be questions that come to mind. And those questions are supposed to get the experts to dissemble their information, put it in a vernacular that everybody can understand, and have a dialogue with you as an elected representative of the public about the merit of their proposal. So many times they count on you not asking the question because you don't want to look stupid. So many times they count on you, I mean, how many times, I hear it on my board, I'm sure, oh yes, the superintendent is our educational expert, whatever they say goes. Well, pardon my French, but what the hell do we need you for that? Why have a school board at all? Yeah, and the number one question that you should all ask when they come in with these grand solutions is, what problem is this designed to solve? What are you trying to fix? How are we going to know that your recommendation is actually working? You know, my favorite one is, well, you know, we changed the testing paradigm, so you'll have to expect a dip in the scores for a couple of years. Really? Oh, and that's another way, by the way, that things are not transparent. I know in Manchester it was a particular problem. We have a lot of Title I schools, and for those of you who don't know what Title I is, that's a supplement. That's a program that provides supplemental funds to schools where at least 40% of the kids are free or reduced hot lunch. I get a few of those. And somehow, because of the, I will say them, either mal or misfeasance of prior administrations, how those matters were handled was not necessarily how they were supposed to be handled or how the board was told it should have been handled. But when you sit there as a board member and you don't ask questions because the expert is speaking, well, you're the idiot. And it has consequences, long-term, very damaging consequences that our superintendent, who unfortunately is leaving, has spent the last 2 years trying to unwind for us. But nonetheless, what ends up happening is you have one school doing assessments, what it's doing with one set of assessments, you've got another school using another school using another, everybody's doing their own thing. So how do you actually evaluate what's working? The answer is you can't. And you know, that's intentional. And when you have people that come before your curriculum committee and say, well, I've been doing this for 16 years, you have to really kind of have the gumption to look back at them and say, well, given where we are and the trajectory we seem to be on, after 16 years, why should I keep listening to you? I know it makes you sound like a jerk, and it made me sound like a jerk when I said it, But at the end of the day, I was presented with a set of test scores that no matter what assessment they were coming from, were showing a downward spiral and a trend. And it gets back to, what problem were you trying to solve? And how are we going to be able to benchmark whether or not it's going in the right direction? We've since, by the way, standardized our assessment system. That's one of the things that I think Dr. Vargas was, before this group, you talked about. And oh, by the way, the roach is all running because the lights are on. Part of being transparent, and you need to understand this, is being able to hold people accountable. You are not transparent if your parents, your community, your taxpayers, even your educators cannot decipher the data that they're getting and know whether or not something is working better than something else or anything's going in any kind of direction. You know, we tend to have these transparency talks be about like the right to know, and they are. Or informing parents about what's happening in the school, in the classroom, and it is. But at the end of the day, there has to be academic transparency. There has to be, you cannot hold people accountable for the results of their recommendations if there's no way to assess that and have those assessments be available to the public. So there are all kinds, there's financial transparency, there's academic transparency, there is community transparency, and by that I mean making sure parents know what's going on, the community knows what's going on. And at the end of the day, if the singular focus of your time on the school board is whether or not what's being done is good for children, and we all get caught up in these maelstroms. I'll tell you, I'm chairman of the school board negotiations committee. You want to talk about frustration and transparency. Things in education tend to become about anything other than whether or not what's happening in the schools is working for the kids. And at the end of the day, that's what you're there to get to the bottom of. And if that's your mindset, if that's the framework through which you ask your questions and you make your proposals, you won't need to be given a script on what to say or what to do. It'll write itself. So, I ran because I was tired of being lied to and I was tired of parents being hoodwinked. And you know, we were one of the leaders against Common Core. And to this day, I still get things from parents in Manchester schoolrooms like, look at this ridiculous math. And it frustrated me when I was on the radio, just like it frustrates me now. And you know, the biggest problem is parents don't want me to use the information. I can't go and say, Mrs. Smith's class at, you know, Main Street Elementary is doing this in math because the parents are afraid that they'll be known as that parent, and it happens. Mm-hmm. And they don't want their kid to be on the receiving end. So when you get that information from a parent, you have to find a way to determine whether or not it's isolated to a classroom or it's happening more systemically, so that you can surface these things and bring them to light.
And one of the problems too with that is when you do bring that to light, it's very difficult to let the public know because you're in non-public meetings discussing this with these individuals that have actually violated policy or whatever have you, and that can't make it out to the public. So you have members of the public looking at you as a member of a board and you're handcuffed. You can't say anything about it.
Exactly. So, and I know Manchester's been in the headlines lately. Webster School come to mind. Anyway. But it's very frustrating when you can't say anything.
I just want to say that equity among the schools, we have 3 elementary schools, is absolutely expected. So we wouldn't have our one-on-one teacher like that without immediate pushback by the principal and then I don't know if that's a best practice or anything, but right, these are the kind of horror stories that I hear from Manchester or Nashua or apparently Wyndham too.
Oh, Wyndham has plenty of them. We're going to talk. We'll speak to them.
Well, to say I'm surprised, I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something you're getting after, but that's part of our job in the district, if ever.
Yeah, Wyndham has quite a, you mentioned equity in schools. That was one of the things that we looked at. You know, everything, all the monies went to our high school when it came budget season. And the other schools, the middle school and our elementary school, were basically treated like a redheaded stepchild. They got nothing. And the high school got everything. But, you know, it was when we started showing them the measurements that they were actually using to say, hey, folks, you know, don't you think it's important when you're building a pyramid to pay a little bit more attention to the base as we kind of come up? So, I have a question. Who in the audience are school board members? Can you raise your hand? Great. I want to speak to you guys for a minute. I think what a lot of the a lot of things that we want to understand with the school boards is we want to kind of have a walk away with like all of our experiences and how we can help you guys be better school board members. And I can share from my point of view what was helpful. I actually was blessed to have a really great guy as a vice chairman, Ken Ari. I know somebody mentioned that name earlier. I think Ken could finish my sentences and I could finish his. So it was really comforting to kind of have to go through that together. You know, we were new to the process, but one of the things that I wrote a couple things down that we walked away with, knowing that how we could effectuate it after we left was putting forward standards, policies, writing policies. We spent a tremendous amount of time over the 3 years putting policies in place that basically govern the people that, you know, once we walked away or once we left. And that was just creating a framework. And that framework, we spent a lot of time, and it was a district improvement plan. And you guys might have heard this, some people in the audience at DIP. And basically what that was, it was taking monies that are allocated within the budget and going ahead and putting resources into, so to speak, a bucket, but then going ahead and making sure that those monies were spent. So when you had those test scores or whatever the measurements that you were going to use, you could say, that money effectuated this result, therefore I'm going to fill that bucket again. Or maybe it didn't, and just the opposite, you wouldn't fill that bucket again. So we didn't have any of that when I came into Wyndham. Matter of fact, we had virtually no fiscal transparency. Our budget, 30% of our budgetary line items, 30% of them were plus or minus 70%. And the inverse is true. That 70% of them were 30% plus or minus. So that's not a budget. It's not a budget at all. That was a company, we go bankrupt. And a lot of the administration just didn't have any insight to that, how you run an organization when it comes to fiduciary responsibilities. And each board member here, that is incumbent upon you. You have a fiduciary responsibility to the public to provide that oversight. That's your job. And that was my job. Unfortunately, some of the members that I sat with didn't take it as seriously as I did. And therefore, you know, we had the rampant, you know, expenditures kind of gone awry. I'll just give you a couple examples of some of the things that we uncovered. We knew that we had a problem, but we didn't know it was as big as we thought it was. We hired a company, Melanson and Heath, to come in and do an internal control audit. Very different than your regular, normal organizational audit where 1 + 1 = 2, and yeah, you check the box, fill out your MS-22 form, send it off to the state. This comes in and basically looks at everything. How are you internally doing things? We had over 130 serious risks and deficiencies. Some of the things that come to mind, we had our BA go to a restaurant, the Tuscan
English
Kitchen.
English.
Business administrator. I gotta tell you a story, Rich, on that note. They used to do that to me all the time with those acronyms. So we were building a school, and being a construction professional, I throw it right back at them. RFIs, PCOs, change orders, English please. And I made a deal with one of our principals. I go, I'll teach you the construction acronyms, and you can teach me the educational ones. But we went through that. We had our business administrator spend $1,000 in going to dinner, have some margaritas and pizzas, and put it on the student activity fund. We had our former interim superintendent go into Suite and Spa 103, student activity fund. We had a former assistant superintendent go to Boston College on taxpayer money, $54,000. Actually went there during school hours. And you're welcome, taxpayer money.
Did he have to pay it back?
No.
Why not?
I was unelected.
Perfect.
What was the name of that company?
Well, there's a budget for that, but
Synergistics?
that's, yeah.
No, the one you just, the.
Melanson and Heath.
Melanson.
Yeah.
Can I jump in?
Crop tape.